Hello. So, in the last video, I said I would make the rooms traversable. Again. However, this time, I actually did it. And to do this, my first idea was to have the characters double jump, but I'll talk about that later. My second idea was to create something that would move the player up to the next room. This was so that it would shorten the distance I would need to get the player, as shortening the distance would mean I don't have to get them through the bottleneck. This is also done in Hollow Knight when going up to rooms as well. I started by having an area which when the player enters, it stops the player from moving and just moves them upwards when they are still in it, and when they are out of it, it then gives them the force upwards so that they still have movement and can move. When that was completed, I just needed to make one more thing to actually get them up to it. So having the double jump, having the mover, I decided it would be best to just have a platform in the middle if there was a gap in the ceiling so that it gives them a bit of extra elevation to get there. So what I did for this is I made a separate scene and added a platform in it, and if the room punches a hole in the ceiling, it then adds that scene to the room scene. And now, all the characters can get to whatever they need, even the pumpkin whose movement ability is purely horizontal. Now it's time to create enemies. And for the first one, I wanted to recreate an enemy from my old game. It's this mushroom one, because it is basically the face of my channel. It is also the first enemy I made in that game, and is the one I like the most. Here it is recreated in my new game. They're just simple, and they have a very easy to avoid attack. However, it could overwhelm the player if there are too many of them, which is good for game design, I think at least. After this, I made the health, because I need the enemies to be able to actually damage the player, because otherwise what's the point of having enemies? I then made the pumpkins roll invincible, so that if it rolls through a projectile they don't get hit, and I also made the ghost ability damage the player, just so I could make it feel a little bit more chaotic. I've also added some particles to the previously mentioned double jump, so that you can now tell when you've used it up. Now was the best part of making health in games. The health bar! So I spent some time drawing up a health bar and put it into the game, and then it was done, mostly. At some point in development, it changes to have a different resolution so it fits more with the game. Now it's time to create a second enemy. This one I wanted to feel different to the first enemy, so I thought I'd make it airborne. After some planning, I decided I wanted to create a mushroom spider. The first thing I did was create the basic movement, which was just, if the player gets too close, it would begin to chase them. Then, it was time to turn the drawing on the plan into some pixel art and animations. This took quite a lot of work to draw, because none of the shapes I was putting down looked like what I wanted. So eventually I settled on this. I then created a web texture for a particle for when the spider moves. After putting the animations onto the spider, here is how it looks. The particles make it look like they are walking on top of the background walls, and it also fits in really well with the other enemies and the style of the game. Now, I've got both of these enemies, and what was the most logical thing to do with them in a roguelike game? Let's put them into my rooms. Spawning enemies throughout rooms was always a massive pain and would always go wrong by spawning in walls and inside of each other. So throughout developing these enemies, I was dreading doing this part. So, after mentally preparing myself to get this done, I began. And 1 hour later, I ended. Honestly, it was nowhere near as bad as I thought it would be. I just used a similar system to what I did in a different game of mine. So basically, I put collision shapes in the rooms that I could use for the spawn areas. The room generator kept track of the rooms that have enemies in, so I gave them to a separate enemy spawner. The spawner takes the collision shapes from the rooms, chooses a random one, puts a random enemy in that position, and then I repeat that for the amount of enemies the area will have. So just very simple. So then I did a little bit of stress testing, seeing the amount of enemies I could spawn, starting with 40, and then going up to 200. Each one of them worked really well, even if it was very chaotic and not going to be used in the game at all. And that is what I've done this week. GameDev is very hard, so please subscribe and have a good day.